Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of AACRAO's Credential Chats. And this time we are joined by one of my favorite people in the space, Gloria Niles. She is Director of Online Learning at the University of Hawaii System. Gloria, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, absolutely. And, for people who haven't already gotten to meet you or see you speak about this stuff, I mean, you have been at the system level. You're not just paying attention to this stuff, but really at the forefront of leading adoption and implementation for longer than just about everybody else. And so, yeah, I'd love to just sort of jump in by asking you to share just a little bit about that journey that you've been on at the University of Hawaii system.
Absolutely. So our journey started in probably the beginning of 2022, where one of our vice presidents put together a system-wide working group around micro-credentials. And I think it was because she was hearing about different silos throughout the system that were starting to talk about these new things called micro-credentials and wanted to coordinate that at the system level. And so that working group, by the end of that academic year of 2022, we realized that this was a much bigger conversation than a couple of months of a working group, and we were going to have it all figured out. And so in May of 2022, our vice president for academic strategy released a guidance memo system wide that said that micro credentials can be used for um, non-credit workforce development, including professional development at the University of Hawaii, because those were some areas where we were already seeing digital badges being issued, um, different terminology. Sometimes they were called micro-credentials, sometimes they were called something else. Um, but a lot of figuring out just what that means, that a digital badge is the representation of a micro-credential and not a credential itself.
Well, I think
And
you,
part,
real quick,
yeah,
you hit on something there, Gloria, of just that I think a lot of people in the acro world think a lot about, right? That you can ask anybody in a registrar's office about big C certificates versus little C certificates,
yes,
and
yes,
I think there's a lot of anxiety over are we gonna have big C, little MC
right,
micro credentials, and
right,
to your point of just, is micro-credential and badge at our institution the same thing or different words?
right.
And so just from the get-go, it sounds like at the system office, there was this awareness that's actually really important stuff.
Right. And that's what came out of that first working group in 2022 with that there were all of these uh, everything from just understanding the terminology and making sure that we were all meaning the same thing when we used these words, and also realizing that the word credential already had its own executive policy. We have a policy around the credentials that the university issues, which are certificates and degrees. Um, and so that policy does not mention micro credentials. And so, what does that mean? And so, that's really where it became apparent that there needs to be a policy specific to this, particularly before we venture into um, credit bearing micro credentials and issuing. And so, along with that came the issuing of digital badges. And so, that guidance memo defined the issuing of digital badges as representation of a micro-credential, and that micro-credentials for the time being would be limited to non-credit and workforce development, which included professional development for the University of Hawaii employees.
And
And
so,
so,
and we love policies,
yeah,
I think with good reason, right? It allows for
right.
consistency, it allows for,
Uh-huh.
just being on the same page with stuff. And so,
Yeah,
you started with this, realizing that you needed a little bit more than,
right.
kind of an ad hoc group. You were able to get this guidance. What came after that?
So the next academic year, so when we came back in fall of 2023, there was another working group that was formed, and this time it was to uh, actually draft an executive policy on micro-credentials. So a separate policy, a brand new policy specific to micro-credentials that outlined a taxonomy for micro-credentials, that they could be issued, what they could be issued for, and how does it how is a micro-credential distinguished from an actual credential? Like how is it distinguished from a certificate? What's the difference? What taxonomy are we going to use? What are the criteria for the digital badging? For example, there was a lot of discussion around I think what we refer to in our policy as participation badges, which are defined as not being associated with a micro-credential. So if somebody wanted to um, issue a digital badge for attending a conference, um, that wouldn't necessarily, that participation badge is not necessarily um, representing a micro-credential. Uh, but higher in the taxonomy, there are different badges that represent like an academic badge for a credit-bearing course or an association badge for um, industry recognized credentials that we're incorporating into one of our academic courses. So that taxonomy, so that we're all speaking again the same language in the policy, uh, that the we also in the policy had to make sure that our 10 independently accredited campuses had their own autonomy in how they develop their micro-credential programs. So the policy allows for micro-credentials to be stackable, but they don't have to be stackable. Uh,
Mm.
but there's the opportunity and the encouragement that we would like them to be stackable, particularly because we have community colleges and universities in our system. And so we do want that continuity of a student being able to use micro credentials in a stackable manner across the university system and across their lifelong journey of education.
I think
And
that's just so
yeah,
important. And it almost sounds like there's been this embracing of just a radical transparency into, not just what credentials are credentialing, but just what the credentials themselves are. That just let's
right,
pull back the veil and just take out the guesswork of, when we call something X, it means Y.
right.
And one question that, as you were talking, that I think some AACRAO members might be sort of wondering, and totally okay if the answer is yeah, we didn't cover that. But in these, kind of policy discussions, was there talk about when they could be issued? As far as, could they be issued at any time once they're earned, or only at the end of a, academics semester?
No, we left that up to the campuses because the campuses will each be developing their own micro-credential, how their process for uh, developing the curriculum. We made sure to say that the curriculum was still in the purview of the faculty for micro-credentials, but each campus would make that determination of when they were going to issue a credential. The only thing that's kind of related to that is that we did um, decide to implement an institution or an enterprise level, so system-wide level, one digital badging platform, um, so that we would be issuing digital badges under one account, uh, mainly for branding purposes and also for data analysis and record keeping, that we would have all micro credentials from the campuses funneled through this um, one contract for digital badging that's issuing digital badging on behalf of the university. Um, so other than that, we didn't put any time constraints on when it would be issued, when a digital badge would be issued for a micro-credential.
That makes perfect sense. Sorry that I cut you off there and interrupted to
That's
ask that
okay.
question, but where did things go from there?
Okay, so once the second work group actually drafted the first draft of, and this is a new policy, which is even more requires even more consultation than, say, revising an existing policy. But this was brand new. So the terminology, the concept required a lot of educating as we sent the draft policy out for formal consultation process. And so that formal consultation process started with our academic officers, so our president and vice president at the time. They weighed in, provided feedback. And then from there, it went to all of our faculty senates across the campuses for feedback from faculty. And that's where, the conversations got interesting. Um, you know, some faculty, we actually did a survey at the same time of faculty to gauge their interest in offering micro-credentials. And we had very polarized, very few in the middle, like, yeah, I guess so. But either it was, yes, I want to give micro-credentials. I've been waiting for this, and these are the ideas that I have for skill development in my uh, subject matter area or my domain, to the opposite end of, you know, you're competing with our credential programs, and what are you trying to do, and reinventing the wheel, and what are these micro credentials? This is a terrible idea. And so there so there was a lot of uh, conversations. Our associate vice president for academic policy and planning, who was my counterpart in this process of leading this work group that had drafted the policy, we were the ones going to have these conversations with faculty senates when they had questions about, what does this mean, and what what's the what's the overall goal or intention of these micro credentials, and how do we get started? Um, so it was conversations with faculty, it was conversations with our Council of Chief Academic Officers, our Chief Student Affairs Officers, um, and on the student affairs side, we had conversations with registrars, with financial aid offices, with admissions to answer their questions about what does this mean? How do we admit students who want to take just want a micro credential and not enroll in a degree program, um, in financial aid, as is this are these eligible for financial aid? So we had these conversations all through the formal consultation process. We made revisions to the draft policy based on feedback that we received where it was relevant to make edits into the policy or clarify um, different points or language in the policy. And then from there, it goes back through the process of eventually approval by our president once we've satisfied uh, this process of formal consultation. So we went through that whole process, and around the beginning of this academic, well, this yeah, pretty much this academic year, we finally had an approved Executive Policy 5.231 uh, on micro-credentials, that's now in place. And so that was our process of getting to a policy.
Well, and just something that you said there really struck with me, just like multiple times, is what does this mean? And I think that kind of goes back to, just what this work was all about. And I'm just, because I heard you saying at the very beginning that a lot of the goal of this was not to replace anything, definitely not to compete with ourselves, but to synthesize
Yes.
with the amazing teaching and learning that we're already doing. And so, is that a lesson learned maybe, that just those conversations through this that the survey was able to prompt was, just a real opportunity for socialization and giving people who might not otherwise have the right venue for it a chance to ask those questions and gain a sense of what does this mean in a way that has them walking away with a real definition, not just, something maybe is off base, coming from what they're worried about.
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was creating the space for those conversations to happen um, was really important. And one thing, like with resistant faculty, that we made clear is that nobody is going to make you offer a micro-credential. However, we're creating the opportunity for people who do want to offer these. And so that was part of it. And then a lot of, just the conversations in general about all of the students with some college no degree and the on ramps and off ramps that we often talk about in this space of micro credentials and making it seamless and transparent for students to be able to stop in and stop out um, along their educational journey. And once we were able to have those kinds of conversations with faculty, along with the, the part of the what does this mean is that we really emphasized um, the skill development and the acknowledgement of the attainment of skills as the purpose of the micro credentials and students' ability to articulate that and how the micro credential or the digital badge helps them to articulate the skills that they're acquiring along their
Hmm.
process of their degree program. Having those opportunities to have those conversations was really helpful. So maybe a takeaway would be, they might have been less startling conversations for the faculty had we, led with those conversations than for them to see a draft policy and get alarmed with, you know, their fears of what might this mean. Yeah,
When and two of the high level takeaways there is just, and I hear that really leading with, that this effort is rooted in centering the learner, that this is all about what's best for our learners. And I think the other thing that I really love that you shared, Gloria, is, we're not here to push you. Like we are
right,
here to pull you if you want to be pulled.
right, yeah,
Uh,
exactly, yeah.
And just really awesome stuff, and I think that there's just so much to learn from you, Gloria, University of Hawaii system, with so many of us kind of being rushed into adoption and implementation to hear, real deliberate, multi-year kind of approach to this. And just thank you so much for taking the time to share with us here on AACRAO's Credential Chats.
I enjoyed the opportunity, so thank you.
Absolutely. Well, she is Gloria Niles at the University of Hawaii system. And thank you so much for joining us, everybody, and have a badge-worthy week. So long.